Hi everyone, my name is Leanne and today I'm going to be telling you all about the books that I read in October. But before we get to those, there are a couple of things that I want to mention. The first of which is very brief, in that I have got an extremely sore throat, so I hope I can make it through this video without coughing my lungs up. The second of which is slightly more important, in that you may notice the lighting is slightly better in this video, or you may not notice, but I definitely do, and that is because I have invested in a softbox, so essentially proper, decent lighting. The sun is setting super early here at the moment. I think today it must have set around 3:30, which just makes it really difficult to make videos, and that's something that I struggle with every time winter rolls around, and it leaves me feeling really dissatisfied with the content I'm creating. I find myself getting stressed about finding the time to film, and finding the time to film at the moment is increasingly difficult because I'm super busy. More on that in a minute. But now that I've got a softbox, I can film at any time and the lighting still looks good. Like, it's really dark outside now, but I don't need to rely on natural lighting, and it's amazing. So I just want to thank you guys for that, because without you guys I wouldn't have been able to afford this softbox. I was able to pay for this softbox using the money that I earned from my affiliate links for the book depository. Now, if you don't know what affiliate links are, I want to be completely transparent about what they are, but they're not sneaky in any way. Essentially, all of the links in my description, and this is something that most creators will do, in the links to the book depository are affiliate links, and that means if you purchase anything from the book depository after following that link, I will receive a small commission from that at no extra cost to your purchase. So mad love and big thanks to everyone for bringing this light up box into my life. Anyways, on to the books. So I thought October was a really bad reading month. Throughout the whole month I felt really dissatisfied about what I was reading. Not necessarily the content, but the number of what I was reading, which is something I continuously have to try and get out of my head, that like it's not about the quantity of books that you read. But the experience of reading in October was also really difficult for me. With fiction books, there were a couple that I read over a period of a couple weeks, and that can really dampen my reading experience with fiction. I don't mind it so much with non-fiction, but with fiction, if I'm sat on a book for several weeks, it tends to kind of ruin the experience for me. There were so many days in October where I wasn't reading anything because I was just so busy between university and between work and having a social life and going to the gym and trying to sleep. I was just really struggling to find the time to read, but I did still manage to read 7 books, so I shouldn't be beating myself up so much. In October, I also participated in VICTOBER, like I always do. Wasn't particularly successful with VICTOBER. I only managed to finish one of the books on my TBR, and it was the shortest one. I read The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. So this is a piece of alien invasion fiction. It follows what happens when a strange cylinder arrives in London and the War of the Worlds begins happening. The book conveys these startling and horrific depictions of what humans would be like under siege, and that really captured my attention. However, what I struggled with about this book was the journalistic style that it had. It meant there was a real distance between myself and the events. In many ways it felt too report-like and too objective for me to become fully invested in this story. I thought it was written fantastically, and if the author was going for that journalistic style, which I'm gonna assume, and I think correctly assume, that that's what they were going for, they definitely achieved it. And I definitely can understand why this book had the impact that it had when it was broadcast on the radio. While I didn't necessarily love the actual story and narrative itself, I thought it was really interesting to experience this story and understand its place in literary history. If you're interested in the history of science fiction, I would really recommend this one. If you want to understand more about the genre, then I think it's one that you definitely need to tick off your TBR. I guess in many ways I enjoyed this less as a literary experience and more as a sort of historical source. I did start another book in VICTOBER. I did start Villette by Charlotte Bronte, but I only got that much in. I think with the reading month I was having and really struggling to stay committed to a story for several days in a row, this just wasn't the right time for me to pick this one up. But I am going to continue to try and read it because what I read of it so far I was really enjoying. I think I was actually enjoying Charlotte Bronte's writing. I've never tried to pretend that I like Jane Eyre, but I don't always reveal the full extent of my dislike for it on this channel. But this has been a really pleasant surprise so far, so I am going to continue on with it. The next book I read was a poetry collection. I read Birthday Letters by Ted Hughes, and I have so many mixed feelings on this, and they are the mixed feelings that I anticipated having before I even began this book. I really struggled to separate Ted Hughes's work from his personal life, and this was the first full collection of his poetry that I had read. And it's a collection that makes it particularly difficult to make that separation with, because this collection is so much about his memories of Sylvia Plath. If you didn't know, they were married, they had children together, and it's so much about his grief after her death. I am a huge Sylvia Plath fan. I, like many young women, feel a real affinity and connection with her work. I feel like she had an ability to articulate things that I've never been able to put into words myself, and to try and separate my feelings about her from this collection was extremely difficult for me. In many places these are very elegant poems about how difficult grief can be. There were some really powerful lines in there, and I cannot deny that Ted Hughes is a phenomenal poet. I love the way he uses sound in his poems. It's something that I'm really attracted to, those subtle sound effects. Very technical and imaginative collection, and as a poet I really respect and admire that. But Ted Hughes is such a damn fuckboy. There were actually some moments in this collection where I found what he was saying quite disrespectful to Plath's memory. The way he saw her, the way he depicted her, it just didn't sit right with me at many points. Yeah, I don't know. I've definitely got mixed feelings on this one, and while I can appreciate the technical quality of these poems, none of them were ever going to be my favourites. So yeah, thank you. Next. I also read a short story collection this month, and that was Cut on the Bias, which is an anthology of lots of different short stories by lots of different writers, and it is edited by Stephanie Tillotson. So this is published by Hono, and I talk about the publishers a lot. I really love them. I used to do a bit of work for them. And they are a Welsh women's publishers, so they exclusively publish works by women from or who have a connection to Wales. All the writers featured in this are no different, and this is a collection of stories that are all about women's relationships and connections to their clothing. And this is something that I had a real interest in. I love clothes. I absolutely love clothes. I love how they can convey something about who you are. I love how they can alter your confidence and alter how you feel about yourself. I just really freaking love clothes. A theme that emerged several times in this collection of short stories was how women's relationship with clothes can often become very important in times of struggle and grief. So the grief of a loved one, or getting out of a very dangerous relationship. Because this is an anthology, there are a lot of different styles in here as well, and I particularly loved a story that featured it was either like letter or email correspondence. In my opinion, this is definitely a really underrated short story collection, and I think so many people would really enjoy this. The next book I read was Here I Stand, and this is also an anthology made up of short stories and poems. This is published by Walker Books, but it's sort of a collaboration between that publishers and Amnesty International, and all royalties made from the sale of this book went to Amnesty International, who fight against injustices all over the world. And that is the subject matter of all of the contributions to this collection. In some shape or form, all of these stories are about people who have had their rights taken away or restricted. So many of these stories in this stand out to me, and I think their focus on young people is particularly important. There are stories about children and teenagers who are exploited in various ways. This collection definitely throws you in at the deep end with some of the harrowing subject matters that it deals with. There are so many fantastic writers featured in this collection. To name but a few, there is Chris Riddell, there's Jackie Kay, Neil Gaiman, John Boyne. We've got Sita Brack-McCarry and Sarah Crossan, and that's just to name the tip of the iceberg. I would highly recommend this collection to young adults and adults alike, but just be aware that there are some extremely difficult subject matters tackled in this book. The next book I read was also a YA book, and that is I'll Give You the Sun by Jandy Nelson. So I really enjoyed this book, but I didn't adore it in the way that it seems a lot of people do. So this is a book about the sibling friendship between two twins. We've got Jude and Noah, and the religious connotations of those names are definitely a prominent feature in this book. It's kind of related to something that I didn't particularly love about this book. Like, a lot of the metaphors were quite heavy-handed, and I found a lot of them like fake deep. So we follow this story from the twins' alternating perspectives. We look at Noah when he was 13 and Jude when they are 16. A tragedy occurs in their life, and while before this tragedy they were incredibly close, the tragedy has really pushed them in different directions. They're really not as close as they once were. And this story is all about exploring that. I guess it's about them then coming back together. I really enjoyed the queer representation in this book. I thought that was done really, really well. The heterosexual romances in this book, I did not really buy into as much. All of the love interests just really got on my nerves. Yes, I just got the sense that the author was really trying to be profound in this book. And when I can see that process when I'm reading something, it really puts me off. In saying that, I still did enjoy this book, and I think it may be one of those books that suffered because of the reading headspace I was in. I would still really recommend this to you if you enjoy YA literature. I really appreciated that while there were romantic relationships in it, it really wasn't the focus of this book, and I think its depiction of what grief can do to you, I thought that was done really well. So yeah, wasn't in love with this book in the same way that a lot of people are, but I still thought it was good. The next book I read was a children's classic. I picked up Heidi by Joanna Spyri. Unless my entire memory of them has been wiped, I don't remember reading a lot of children's classics growing up. Like, I definitely read tons, but classics wasn't something that I really read, even in abridged form, as far as I can remember. So I basically had no idea what this book was about, other than it was set in the Alps. But reading this story was a really great reading experience. I'm really glad that I picked it up. This is about a little girl named Heidi who is left orphaned, as a child tends to be in children's fiction. Her aunt is put in charge of her well-being, and after some deliberation, her aunt's like, you know what, can't be bothered, and ships Heidi off to stay with Heidi's grandfather in a secluded cabin in the Swiss Alps. Heidi loves it there, she has the best time, she loves her grandfather, she loves living in this secluded cabin and all the like wilderness and animals around her. She is living her best life. But one day her aunt rocks up again and she's like, hey Heidi, gonna ship you off to live with this wealthy family in Frankfurt. Cool. So Heidi heads off to Frankfurt and she moves in with this wealthy family, and she suffers from a really intense homesickness, but she does make some dear friends here and she learns a lot of quite profound life lessons. It was really enjoyable to see the world through Heidi's perspective. She's such a likeable little girl. She has a real innocence and curiosity and acceptance about the world around her. This is a book about love and compassion and friendship, and it was just a really enjoyable read. And the final book that I'm going to talk about can also be described as a thoroughly enjoyable and lovely little read, and that was Franklin and Luna Go to the Moon by Jen Campbell, with illustrations by Katie Harnett. I'm sure most of you have already heard about this children's picture book, but I don't think anyone would complain about hearing about it again. This is Jen's second book about Franklin and Luna's adventures. In the first book, we learn about how they met and the friendship that formed between the two of them. Franklin is a dragon and Luna is a lovely little girl with red hair. They love to read stories together and go on adventures, and one day Luna becomes curious about where Franklin's family come from. And thus begins our adventure, finding out where Franklin's family are. And that leads us to the moon. I love Jen's use of rhyme in this book. I think it's quite a more sophisticated and subtle form of rhyme than I'm used to in children's books, and I really appreciated that. I read this book out loud to myself several times, and each time I had the best time. The illustrations are also phenomenal, and there's one in particular that I would like to point out. It is this one, which depicts Luna's friends. It's a book about friendship, and it's a book about acceptance, and it's a book about the joys of reading and learning. So if you've got a little one in your life, or you just enjoy a lovely story yourself, I would highly recommend this one. So that's it. Those are all the books I read in October. It wasn't as much of a catastrophe as I initially thought it was, not by any stretch of the imagination. Life is busy, and I just need to accept that that means I'm not going to be reading as much as I did over the summer where I was sad and unemployed. I think I'd much rather feel the way I do now and be busy like I am and read fewer books than the way I was over summer. Without getting too oversharey and deep, I'm really happy at the moment, and I'm really proud of myself. So yeah, that's it. I hope you enjoyed hearing about all of the books that I read in October. Let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these and what you thought of them. And that's all from me for now, but I will talk to you guys in my next video.